What if I told you that it's possible to make a gold farm that gets nearly 1500 gold blocks every hour using only 56 obsidian, mining no magma blocks, 0 turtle eggs, and no beacon? Welcome to the Fire Magma Llama Gold Farm. It uses a unique portal dropsheet layout to save on obsidian and uses real-life physics equations to optimize the platform size based on mob lifetime. This makes sure that higher platforms are just as efficient as lower ones. Utilizing the concept of boat looting by MD transports the mobs to high above the farm where the player's spawning sphere is best optimized, taking mobs out of the mob cap when they enter a boat, leading to significant rate improvements. Instead of slow turtle eggs, we have the wonderful concept of aggression towards a single llama powering the farm, lovingly coined as aggro by C5, who pioneered this concept in their great video a few months ago. You can even eliminate the need for a beacon with this feeding system that can be configured for different types of food and ensures the player can eat periodically. And you can use either magma blocks or soul soil lit on fire for essentially the same rates of 1450 gold blocks per hour. Another cool thing about the farm is that it makes an absolutely insane amount of XP. It'll take you from 0 to 30 levels in 37 seconds, and it will take you from 0 to 100 levels in just under 14 minutes, making it suitable for pretty much all but the most robust XP needs. It also uses a row of crafters and smart storage to send gold blocks to a shulker loader or chests, or send it directly to a bartering farm, which I'll show in my next video. So how does this all work? So if we want to know how to design a good gold farm, we have to know a little bit about how the spawning algorithm works. And the main way this happens is that mobs will spawn in a 128 radius sphere around the player like this. This means that we can position the spawn sphere so that mobs only spawn in certain areas and nowhere else in the world, and this is really important because of a thing called the mob cap. And the way you can find this is by looking on your F3 screen in this spot right here, and you can see the amount of monsters that are currently active in your world and have already spawned. And there's a hard cap on the amount of monsters that can be in your world at any given time of 70. Occasionally they can go over that for various reasons, but just picture the limit as exactly 70, which will give you a pretty good idea of how it works. So right now my despawn sphere is up high in the world and it's not really intersecting any caves, so my monster count is 0. And you'll see as I manipulate where this sphere is at, the monster count will go up and up and up as more monsters are now spawning in caves below me, and then whenever I fall all the way down to the ground, it's gone to just over 70. So what this means is that any farm that's based in the nether underneath the nether roof will have tons and tons of work to clear out all the other places that mobs could spawn besides your farm. This is why gold farms that are made in the nether are incredibly inefficient, because you already have all these other spawning spaces where mobs can spawn and they hog up the mob cap. And also the despawning sphere is really big, so I've just put one right here and you can see just how far it goes out, which in a small place like the nether really lends itself to a lot of annoying spawning spaces where there's tons of places that things can spawn. You don't want to have to spawn proof all this giant area. And thankfully in the nether, there's a lot of room above the bedrock ceiling to where you can make this despawn sphere not really intersect with any spawnable spaces at all. So for this example, I'm having the player AFK at Y250, and there's not any room for a mob to spawn underneath where the sphere intersects the actual world down here. So this means that if we were to set some actual spawnable blocks right here, we'd be getting a crazy amount of things spawning. See, we're already hitting the mob cap on just this small square here. But the thing is, in different biomes, different mobs have different weights in the nether and will spawn more frequently. So we want to build this farm in the nether waste where the zombie pigmen have a higher chance to spawn compared to all the other mobs, because they're the ones who actually give us gold. So we want to minimize all the other mobs and not have any of them spawning. One more thing we can do to increase efficiency is we can actually change the spawnable block to magma instead of a normal block. And what this will do is allow zombie pigmen to spawn and not the normal piglins, because they're actually fireproof. This means that we could automatically get rid of any piglin spawns in the farm, besides those in the actual portals themselves. However, we'll still have magma cubes and gas being able to spawn. We can eliminate these with how we place the platforms, so we're going to go ahead and go with this biome. But what if I told you that there's another block that you can spawn on that is just as efficient as magma blocks for spawning? And that would be Soulfire and Soul Soil. You see, the light that Soulfire emits is not enough to keep zombie pigmen from spawning, which spawn at a light level of 11. This means that this is another perfectly valid block that we can use for spawning in the nether. So just for transparency's sake, I'd like to point out that C5 beat me to this discovery by a month or so. So I'm not claiming to be the first one who's figured this out. However, I did discover it independently, and the way I found this out was when I was AFKing the farm and had forgotten to spawn proof this block. And after that, I was like, I guess they can actually spawn to these. I didn't even think about that. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the concept of boat looting. So the theory behind this is whenever you push a mob into a boat, it will eliminate that monster from the mob cap. So for example here, we'll see that there's exactly one monster in the world at the top of the world, and if I go ahead and push this guy into the boat, it'll turn into 0. So this means that we can stack a bunch of boats for these guys to go through, which will actually eliminate them from the mob cap so that we can kill them while they're in the boats, meaning that the rates of our farm will get better. And by actually using looting on our sword at the same time as this, we can change our expected values from 1/2 a nugget without looting to 2 nuggets. This essentially means that we can quadruple the rates of our farm by using looting. So a lot of the farm philosophy is just how do we remove mobs from the mob cap as quickly as possible while still spawning a lot of them. And another way that we can remove mobs from the mob cap quickly is by sending them through a portal. You see, whenever I throw a snowball at them and hit them, they'll run through the nether portal, taking them out of the mob cap and taking the monster count down to 0. And now all these zombified piglins are actually in the overworld, so if we go ahead and go through, we can see where they came through the portal. So the question for a spawning platform becomes, how do we get pigmen into portals across dimensions as quickly as possible so that we can transport them to where the player can kill them in boats instantly? But at the same time, we also want to minimize obsidian because people don't want to build a whole obsidian farm just to build a gold farm. And so that is where this drop shaft mechanic comes in. You see, whenever piglins spawn on this platform, they'll immediately run towards the center where they're aggravated. This means that as piglin are falling down, they're still facing and trying to walk towards the center, which means they'll go through this portal pretty much instantly. And we also put some powdered snow here in order to cancel out their fall damage so that we can consistently damage them on the overworld side when they're being transported through there. But before we talk about overworld transportation, first we need to talk about how we're getting the zombie pigmen to run through the portals in the first place. You can use either turtle eggs or aggression to accomplish this. Aggression is faster but is limited by the fact that the player can't spawn mobs very close to them. So we can just make all the piglin mad at a llama instead. This concept was pioneered by C5, so if you're interested in the mechanics, go watch their video, which is really informative. But in a nutshell, any pigman that gets angered by the llama and stays in line of sight with them and remains within follow range of 55 blocks will stay angry at them indefinitely and keep calling reinforcements. Because of the way reinforcement calls work, one piglin can actually reach 8 platforms. And whenever that aggression call actually goes out, all of the zombified piglins are going to take the shortest path towards the object of the aggression, or the llama in this case. They'll even go so far as to damage themselves to get to their target. However, we'll see that with just one pigman sounding the aggression calls, they actually don't come super frequently, so these guys will kind of hang out on the platform for a little bit before they receive an actual call, leading to a lot of inefficiency in the farm. This is because when aggroed, zombified piglins will sound an aggression call within 4 to 6 seconds. So if the zombie pigman hears a call within the first 20 game ticks, they'll automatically start pathfinding towards the llama after those 20 game ticks are over. So we have to figure out how many piglins we have to have sounding aggression calls so that we're guaranteed to get one within the first 20 game ticks. Thankfully, Nico is Lost has actually done some really great work on the number of pigmens it takes to get at least one aggression call within the first 20 game ticks. You'll have to see his video for the details on that because it's actually a lot more complex than I'm going to go through in this video. Suffice it to say that in order to get high 90s chance of having that call within the first 20 game ticks, you need at least around 16 or so pigmen, preferably a little bit more if you can, but it's not going to hurt your efficiency like crazy if not. And so you'll see that if we just stack a lot more pigmen around the llama on this one layer, we'll be able to reach all the other pigmen on all the 8 layers simultaneously within the first 20 game ticks. Expanding this concept into 2 groups of aggression pigmen, we can actually transfer this aggression downwards, since pigmen in boats will spread aggression 11 blocks downwards and 10 blocks upwards from the block that they're sitting on. And remember, any pigmen that gets aggroed, as long as they have line of sight and are within 55 blocks of the original target, they'll remain angry indefinitely, kind of like all you guys after the mob votes. So here we can see a cool example of the farm warming up and the aggression transferring downwards layer by layer, and you'll see this aggression corresponds to where each piglin in a boat is on the way down, transferring that signal as they go. And if we simulate more spawns after it's warmed up, we'll see that all the piglins will be running towards the center of the farm at the exact same time from both groups. This means that we found a dirt cheap, playerless way to get piglins to run towards the center of the farm really quickly. But unfortunately, that's not the end of things. You see, if we have every platform exactly the same width, that means that the lifetime per platform is going to vary a lot from the bottom to the top of the farm. If you were to iterate and find the maximum width that you could extend these platforms to get the most spawns, that means that the very top layer would have a really long lifetime compared to the very bottom layer. So wouldn't it be better if we can make a curve where the lifetime would all be the same on every layer and then iterate that? So the equation for the lifetime of any platform will look like this. The 20 game ticks before they hear the call is the 1 second value, plus the walk time plus the fall time will always be less than or equal to our maximum target lifetime. Using some basic physics without air resistance, the walk time turns into this equation, the fall time turns into this equation. Now we have a very simplified expression for our total lifetime in seconds with x and y values as inputs. And the cool thing is, we know all the y values relative to where the portal has to be already. We just need to find the acceleration value. Well, it turns out it was never as simple as kinematic equations at all, and the real equations that govern physics in Minecraft are enough to make a grown man cry. And even approximating an acceleration value doesn't work. But thankfully, we don't have to do higher mathematics because we can just time how long it takes each pigment to fall from each layer to the ground. And then we can just record each of those values and put them into an Excel sheet, and then we can figure out the width that each of our platforms have to be. And that's coming from the very first equation we had earlier. This means that we can make curves where the maximum lifetime is now going to be extremely similar across platforms. So now we need to turn all these lines into whole platforms that are still easy to build, and then iterate which maximum lifetime in seconds is going to be the most mobs per hour in our farm. And once we get all that sorted, it'll look something like this. Of course, you can also use magma blocks, and here are the rates for both of them compared back to back. You'll see that there's really not much of a difference. It's not even a full percentage of the efficiency of the farm that's affected by that, so feel free and build whichever one is easiest for you personally. But the cool thing is you don't actually have to farm any of those magma blocks at all, because you can set up this magma farm I made a few weeks ago, and there's a few different versions of this farm, but the one that most people will make will produce around 750 magma blocks every hour, which is good enough to AFK all the blocks you'll need for the farm in just around 11 hours or so. And that means for this 30-minute build, you can get all the blocks you'll need for this farm and any other one for free. So you can see here on the top layer of the platform that we have the llama, and we're using a similar system to what was shown in the demonstration. And the way you actually do this in survival is just by grabbing one snowball and then going right back down here to where there's a ladder. And then what you'll do is you'll just open these trapdoors, hit the llama with the snowball, and then hide right behind these guys. And then they'll anger everyone on the platform. And then you can just close them right back up just to be safe, and then climb up and fly away. And the great thing is, if one of these piglins happens to die while they're in this boat, they're actually close enough to the edge that so that any piglin that's running over the trapdoors will actually get forced into the boat, so you never have to worry about the llama spit killing both of these and putting them back in there. And you'll see this system also transfers the aggression downwards through this column, and it uses a very similar method to the example I showed before, using these transfer pigmen along the way here, making sure to keep them out of line of sight, just off to the side here. And you'll see that all the piglins on the outside of this range will arrive at the center at approximately the same time. And of course on top we have these glass blocks, which are just preventing magma cubes and gas from spawning on the top layer. These won't be spawning on any of the bottom layers because they're too big, so they need a 3x3 for magma cubes, or even larger for the gas. This is good enough to spawn proof for them on the top layer and keep those from hogging up our rates. So you may have noticed that some platforms actually use string around the outside in order to have the pigmen not pathfind onto this glass. However, I've noticed that with the aggro and with this size of a platform, that's actually not even a concern, so you can feel free to omit the string for this part of the farm. One of the only drawbacks of this farm, in my opinion, is that it uses just a decent amount of wood. So if that concerns you, you could replace one of these lines of trapdoors with a normal solid block of any of your choosing. This actually decreases the efficiency very slightly by, I believe it was around a percent or so whenever I tested it. So it's not a big deal to worry about, but it's something to keep in mind. Just a little way to make it a little bit more efficient for you. And you may have seen some aggression-based farms with fences all around each platform, but however, if we have this kind of staggered shape where the platforms decrease in size as we go up, for some reason we can just get away with one single fence on the outside here, since whenever we put the piglins there, they'll immediately try to go to the center. But if we were to remove it, the pigmen will actually try and drop down on the ground there and go through. So that's why we actually have to have this on this one layer, so we can just get away with this layer right here. You'll notice that most of the piglins are actually going to be going through this nether portal pretty much instantly. On very rare occasions, one can sit in the powdered snow, but it never takes very long because they still try and walk towards the center. But even the baby piglins will be getting their fall damage reset in this configuration right here before going through the portal. And going through the portal, you'll see quite an interesting sight here on the Overworld side. This weird setup with the ladders is necessary because mobs have a 15-second cooldown before they can travel from one portal into the next portal. So what we have here is an aggression-based system in the overworld to prevent you from having to gather any turtle eggs. You can just get a few of these guys in boats and have them around the snow golem. And what this is doing is they're sounding cries for war to all these guys coming through the portal, and they're trying to rush to kill the snow golem. And meanwhile, they're going to get transported up this ladder elevator, pushed over by water, and fall down into this drop chute in order to damage them perfectly to where they'll have the right amount of health. And then they'll be getting sent through this portal into where the boat loading setup is. And you'll see that right here, I have a little bit of lava just to flush them a little bit easier towards the center. It doesn't cancel out any meaningful part of the fall damage, and it still allows us to flush them since they're lava-proof mobs into the portal. There's a small amount of baby penguins that stay right here in this corner. However, it's not enough to cause lag over extended periods. It's going to always look about the same as this, and it's not going to really contribute to lag at all. So if these walls right here were blocks, every once in a while a pigman would come up to where their hitbox would intersect where that block hitbox would be, and they'd get stuck right at this lip right here. So the walls are just a way to keep the pigmen in this exact block right here and not have them intersect with that hitbox, and they just extend up to the top in a very similar fashion to some other flushing systems you may have seen before. So this overworld transportation system was actually inspired pretty heavily by one that Fortunate Diamond uses on their video, so I'll go ahead and link that video in the description, even though I don't know if they originally came up with the ladder transportation or not. But this version I'm optimizing to remove turtle eggs entirely from the farm because nobody wants to gather those. Of course, if you did have turtle eggs, you could just put it right around where this golem is and they would attract all the piglins forward. And one more quick thing I forgot here, you actually don't need those magma blocks right here. I had some magma blocks here in an earlier version of the farm, but you actually don't need those because any chicken jockeys will climb up all the way up this ladder, fall it through this drop shaft, and then the chickens will be burned and the babies will go through the portal. So no need for those blocks down there. And last but not least, we have the collection system up here. So one important thing to note that if you have a beacon, you actually don't need this top portion right up here. And that's because this system is actually going to feed a carrot to the player around every 7 minutes or so. Beacons are usually used for two reasons in gold farms. One is the haste, allowing players to sweeping edge a little bit more often, which we don't need. And the second reason is actually when the player's hunger bar runs out, they'll start taking damage, and the regeneration effect of the beacon actually prevents this from killing the player. However, if we have the player eat every now and then, we don't need this hunger regeneration effect, and turns out for these rates we don't actually need the haste effect of the beacon either, so that means that no withers are harmed in the making of this farm, and it's a little bit easier to not have that another prerequisite. And looking at the killing chamber, you'll see that this works by the player looking at the armor stand right here and actually swiping every 11 game ticks. What this is doing is using the armor stand to transfer sweeping edge to both of these boats right here. And here are all the enchantments that are on that sword. You'll notice that we don't have smite, even though in 1.21 smite does apply with the sweeping edge effect. This is because with smite, it actually causes all the pigmen to be killed instantly on one shot, and we actually don't want that. You see, on very rare occasions, one of the baby pigmen will actually come through and not get instantly sucked into the portal. Most gold farms use a turtle egg in order to counteract this. However, we're actually using the aggression of the pigmen in the boats, not dying on the very first hit, in order to call those rare baby pigmen back into the boats in those rare scenarios within 20 game ticks. And this has a bonus effect of having one less enchantment that we need. So in order to optimize lag a little bit better, we're having all this extra XP get killed by the cactus, and what this will do is ensure that there's not a giant cloud of it hanging around here, leading to a slightly better MSPT, a little bit better performance. And this slab right here prevents the player from ever actually touching this cactus as long as they're not crouched. And before running the farm, you'll also want to make sure that the clock lever is on so that the blocks will be pushing the items onto the sorter. You also want to make sure that the food clock up here doesn't have this lever powered in order to turn it off, so that the player will be dispensed carrots every now and then via this dropper. Additionally, if you do enter a portal, the pigmen down here will actually be de-aggroed, so just keep in mind that you'd have to restart the bottom portion of the farm if you did enter a portal or leave the game. I'd also like to mention that you can run this farm with the normal auto clicker set to 550 milliseconds, but I'd actually prefer using carpet mod if you do have that installed, and you can set that so that the player attacks every 11 game ticks. And that command is in the tutorial towards the end. The advantages of carpet mod is that if your server lags, then you actually won't lose any time and your sweep will still be on time. If your server or client is lagging a lot, then if you use a standard auto clicker, it can sometimes become desynced and lead to a little bit less rates of the farm. And that depends on how hard you're lagging, of course. So you can see that when running the farm, the lag and the MSPT in the bottom right graph is really quite good for a gold farm that's producing, almost 50,000 mobs every hour. And you can see my system in the top right. And if you want to know the optimization mods I'm using, testing, those will be in the bottom left right here. So as long as the farm isn't running to 50 MSBT, it actually won't be lagging and you can run it with full efficiency. Even though the average is 15, the max is getting to 35, so you might want to just be aware of that if you're using an external auto clicker instead of Tweakaroo or Carpet. If you're using Tweakaroo or Carpet, you won't have this issue. And underneath we have a collection system that is pushing all the items onto this one slot, and they're all being pushed by these pistons right here as well. And this will all be sending all the items to where they're aligned directly over this chest, where the slime block will yeet them over all these double hopper speed filters. And we're also using alternating signal strength 4 and signal strength 2 filters here. And what this does is essentially lets us batch more gold items in the front. And what this means is that instead of just having a buffer of a little over 20 items here, we have a lot more that can be put in each individual hopper. And this means that if there is a little bit of variability of whenever a bunch of nuggets are coming in, it helps give us a little bit more leeway for that. This system right here draws items from this hopper at double hopper speed, and will push it into this dropper or crafter, and then that will push it into this stream of droppers, pushing all the items into this dropper right here. So for most of the farm, we have just golden nuggets being crafted into ingots for 1.21. However, there's also a chance for some ingots to drop from Pigmen themselves, and so those go into this filter and into the sorting system like that. Ignore the wool block that I had here for carpet testing. This is actually a crafter that points into this single shulker box loader, and this is filling it up with blocks of gold slowly over time. And of course, you don't have to actually use a shulker loader here. You could just use a normal chest and hopper system for easy storage, but it makes so many gold blocks that you probably want a shulker loader here if you do have shulkers already. So one more thing to note is that this system is limited to 18,000 ingots per hour, which is 2 times hopper speed. Up until that point, it'll be functioning correctly. You can use this compactor for any gold farm that gets less than that amount of ingots per hour. This one's getting just over 13,000, so it works perfectly. And you'll see that right down here, whenever all of those ingots come into the crafter, it'll be powering this comparator, which is being read into the side by this comparator, and then that will give a signal back in to actually craft the block in this very simple setup. The food counter up top isn't too bad either. It's using a cop-flopped version of ENX04's clock, which is activating this every time it cycles, which is then activating this pulse, which is then activating this observer every other time it cycles, just like so. And you'll see that this actually makes this comparator fader start up, which activates this trapdoor for just long enough for the player to eat 2 times. But right now I just have a carpet bot in, so he didn't actually eat at the moment. But if this were the player, they'd have golden carrots in their offhand and would have eaten just then. And this timer is also precisely timed for the amount of golden carrots the player needs before they actually run out of health, and so it will keep you perfectly fed at the optimal rate of golden carrot consumption. So now that we know how the farm works, let's jump into the tutorial.
Let's get it on.
Since we got to be here, listening, I love you. There's nothing wrong with me loving you, baby, no, and giving yourself to me can never be wrong. If the love is true, oh baby.
Let's get it on.
So if you're still here, thank you so much for watching. I've been working on this design for the past 3 months essentially, so it's actually really nice to see this project finally come to conclusion. And thanks for bearing with this extremely long video. I tried to just include everything I could about how the farm works and also the full tutorial. And if you appreciate all the time, effort, and video editing this took, and believe me, it took a lot, then consider subscribing to the channel, or you can see more cool builds like this. And keep an eye out for my next video where I'll actually be posting a bartering farm that is designed to work flawlessly with the gold farm. So yeah, stay tuned if you're interested in that. And as always, my Discord is open and available for any questions you might have. Once again, thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next video.